Let's now take a look at example 3, in which we're going to learn how to create a histogram. So example 3 involves the income of faculty. So we have the yearly income reported by faculty at a small college, and we want to make the graph that will show the trend in the income paid to faculty. So first we need to look at what is the most appropriate type of graph for this data. So we know we're not talking about percentages, so a circle graph or pie chart would not be the best choice. Similarly, we don't have anything involving time, so a line graph would not be a good option. So a bar graph or histogram in this case would best show how many faculty have a particular salary. So first I'll go ahead and provide my answer, justifying why a histogram is the best choice. So here I've stated that a bar chart is best for showing how the quantity of items compare between categories. In this example, a bar graph will allow the reader to compare the number of faculty salaries that fall into each income bracket. So here we're kind of using the word bar chart and histogram interchangeably, but there is a difference. Histograms are only used when you have numerical data that are being used to create your various bars. A bar chart or bar graph would be just categorical information. So like our previous example with the food orders, I had burgers and fries and various food items becoming the different categories to create my bars. Here I'm using numerical data. So I'm taking this whole range of data and artificially breaking it into different categories of salaries just to ease the ability to create a bar chart. So when you do have that numerical data that you're breaking into categories, that by definition is a histogram. So the first thing I want to do is sort my data to be able to count how many fall into the various numbers. Here we don't have to worry about figuring out our class widths or what the start and end points would be because they have been provided within this chart. So first let's go ahead and sort our data in column A. So I'm going to click on column A. I'm going to go to the data menu and I'm going to sort the range by column A to Z. So that will sort all the values in column A, going from the lowest value up to the highest value listed. So again, here I could go through and count by hand how many items or salaries in this case fall between $0 and $10,000. Here we can count it pretty easily because the list starts at 1 and goes in increasing value. So before hitting the 10,000 mark, the last data cell to do that was in row 19. So here the frequency is 19. Then I would look for the salaries between the 10,000 and 2,000. So here there's only 2 data values. And we could continue counting through the lists in a similar manner. Now in the last example I showed the option of count if. That is if you want a fast way, a little bit more advanced way of using spreadsheets to count the number of quantities in a list of cells that fit a particular criterion, you can use that. So here I'm just going to show again that functionality if you want to use it. If you don't feel particularly comfortable with spreadsheets, by all means go ahead and count through the list by hand to figure out how many data values fall within those various ranges. So here, what we're going to do if you do want to use that count if functionality, you're going to click on the box that you want the operation to occur. You're going to type in equals, and then we're going to type in count if. Now here, the key difference is I want to meet 2 criteria. I want to be both greater than 20,000, but also less than or equal to 30,000. So in that case, if you see here, there's 2 options, count if or count ifs. We want the option with that extra S on the end because we have multiple criteria that have to be met. So I'm going to use my open parenthesis. Now we have to state which cells we want to check. So I'm just going to select all of column A. We put a comma and then we type our criteria inside those quote marks. So I want the values to be greater than 20,000. And then here we're going to put the second criteria. So I put a comma. I'm going to select the cells I'm checking again. In this case, all of column A. And the second criteria is that they have to be less than, and to do the less than or equal to, you just type less than and equal to right next to each other like that. So less than or equal to 30,000. And my quotes and my parentheses, So here I'm listing the two criteria that I want met, and if any data value meets both, then it's included in my count. So when I hit enter, I can see I get a value of 1, and we can verify it. Is there exactly one value between 20,000 and 30,000? Well, yes, it's this data value in row 22. So I could go through and retype all of that. A really fast way of doing it is if you do click on the formula, and you can copy it just like you copy text in like a Word document. You can then paste that into the next row, so there's less typing, and then you adjust your formula as needed. So here I want it to be greater than 30,000 but less than or equal to 40,000, and so on. So I'm just going to use that COUNTIFs function for the rest of the table just to speed up my calculation. However, you're welcome to always go through and manually count the values that fall between those various ranges of salaries. Now for the last item, I only want the values greater than 80. I don't need it to be necessarily less than something. So I can go ahead and take off my second criteria and just say that it's greater than 80,000. And rather than using COUNTIFs, this now just becomes a normal COUNTIF because there's only one criteria to be checked. Okay, and if I want to be really sure that I did this correctly, just because I used a lot of other functions, or I did a lot of counting by hand, and I want to make sure I've included all of my data values, is I could go ahead and add up all of the values in the frequency and make sure that it equals the number of data items that we have. So here I'm just going to do a quick sum calculation. So that SUM function allows you to quickly add up values in various cells. And so here I select the cells that I want to be added up. With all of these spreadsheet formulas, you always have to close out your parentheses and then hit enter. So I have 60 values accounted for, and if I look at my row, I do in fact have 60 data values. So that's just a way to quickly check whether we may be leaving out some values or I miscounted some of the values from our frequency. But that's just a quick way to check. So next we want to go ahead and create our graph. Now, just fair warning here, Excel is definitely better at creating histograms, I would say, than the Google Sheets program that we're using here. So there's kind of two ways to create a histogram. One is a little less accurate than another, but I'll show you both ways. So similar to what we did in the past, for our previous examples, you can select the categories and the frequency, and then we go to Insert, Chart. And the particular chart that I'm going to show you first is a bar chart. So the bar chart looks pretty much like what we want. It has the labels, right? The 0 to 10,000, 10,000 to 20,000, and so on labeled perfectly. And it has my frequency values. The only flaw in this graph is that a true histogram won't have spaces in between the values like what we're seeing here. A true histogram, the edges of each bar should be essentially touching because it represents numbers in a number line, right? If I have 10,000 and my next value is 10,001, they should be right next to each other on a number line. There shouldn't be any sort of space. So this is one way that you can kind of create a histogram. It's not perfect because there is that gap between our bars. However, it does allow us to make sure that our labels match exactly what we wanted from our table. So I'm actually going to delete this one and show the other type of chart. So the little bit more exact version of a histogram, we don't actually need to use the table. We would need to use our raw data. So here I'm going to select column A. I'm going to go to Insert, Chart, and under the chart type, this time I'm going to go down to the other category, and if you notice there's one that says histogram chart, that's the option that we're going to select. Now this one we can see it does meet the criteria of having the bars touch like in a traditional histogram. However, the labels aren't exactly what we want, right? We wanted the first bar to represent the values between 0 and 10,000, and here it changed that on us, right? Now the values are, for my first bar, between 0 and 15,000. So we're going to have to do a little bit more complex editing to get this to fit the way we want. And this is why, again, I mentioned Google Sheets is not the best at creating histograms. Excel is a little bit better in that sort of functionality. But again, you can either use a bar chart with those kind of extra gaps, or you can create your histogram and edit it like we're going to show here. So the first thing you want to do is click on the Customize menu, and then from the submenus you want to select the histogram or open up the histogram menu. So under bucket size, right now it's showing auto, so it automatically selected the bucket size that it thought would be best. But here we actually do want it to be broken up into those $10,000 buckets. So here if you get rid of auto, you can type in the size of your bucket. Here we want 10,000. And then when I hit enter, it'll go ahead and break it into those 10,000s for me. So here we can see now that looks like what we want. The first bar is the 1 to 10,000 or 0 to 10,000. And again, similar to what we saw in our other examples, the bar chart's kind of in the way. So I'm going to click on the white space and drag it down to part C. So if we compare, right, I'm seeing my 19 there. Then between 10,000 and 20,000, there's our value of 2, and so on. The only flaw to this that we can't really fix is that in our chart we put the above 80,000 into its own category, but here I can't edit that to change these last categories to be lumped together. So we could certainly do that as we saw for the bar chart option, but unfortunately the histogram here doesn't have that functionality. The other things we want to add are our axes titles. So I do want to include a chart title. So here we can type it in, it's the yearly income for faculty. And we also want to have our horizontal axis title. So that's the one running along the bottom, that's the yearly income. And the vertical axis title. So the vertical axis title is the number of faculty. And that's it. Once your graph is formatted the way that you want, that's when you can copy and paste it into another document if you wish.